We are going to talk about fractions today, and I know you guys don't like fractions, most of you. They're not hard to work with, you just have to understand the concept behind them. So let's start with something really simple. We're going to start with 1/2 plus 3 over 4. The basic problem here is that we can't add things that aren't the same size. Okay, so let's take 2 pi's and let's divide one of them in half and the other in quarters. So what we're doing is we're adding 1/2 and 3/4. Okay, how much do we have? How much pi do we have when we're done adding them? Well, if we can make them the same size, then it's easier to add them together. So what we're doing is we're adding pieces, portions of pies together. So if we take this and divide it so that it's the same number of pieces as this is, now we can add the number of pieces that we have together. So 1/2 is the same as 2/4, isn't it? So if I divide this pie into quarters, that's what I've got. I've got 2/4. And over here I still have 3/4. So what this process is called is finding the lowest common denominator. It's also finding the lowest or the least common multiple, which is sometimes how it's defined. We call it the lowest common denominator because that's what this is. Okay, the bottom half of a fraction is called the denominator, the top half of the fraction is called the numerator. So when we add fractions that have unlike denominators, we're essentially saying, well, we're adding different sized pieces together. We've got to make the pieces the same size, and that's how we achieve adding them up. So what are 2/4? There's 1 and there's 2, plus 3/4. How many quarters do we have? Well, we have 5, don't we? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quarters. And if you're still in junior high math, then you might be expected to take that number and turn it into a mixed fraction. Once you're in grade 10, once you're into high school math, this is not really done anymore. We don't work with mixed fractions again until really grade 12, when we need them for one of the topics there. But here, how do you make a mixed fraction? Well, how many times does 4 go into 5? Once, right? Okay, so once. What's left over? So if 4 goes into 5 once, that takes us up to 4, and it leaves 1. So if we rearrange these pieces like this, and we take the 5/4 that we have and put them all into 1 pi, and remember we have 5/4, so there's our 1 plus 1/4. All right, so that's the basic idea. And we're going to do lots more examples here. So next one, 1/6 plus 2/3. So what's my common denominator? What's the smallest number that both 3 and 6 go into? Okay, so I ask my students sometimes, what's the lowest common denominator, and I hear 3. And what they're hearing me ask is, which of these numbers is the lower one? Well, yeah, 3 is the lower one, but it's not the lowest common denominator. What that means is least common multiple. So what you need is a number that both of these numbers go into. Another thing I get is people will say 18. Well, 6 and 3 both go into 18, yes. They both go into 12 too. But you don't need to go that high. We want the smallest one if possible, okay? So the smallest number that both 6 and 3 go into is 6. So here's what I like to do. Find your lowest common denominator and write that, just for this to start with. And then your numerators need to be multiplied. So this denominator hasn't changed, so the numerator won't change either. This denominator has been multiplied by 2. So lots of students, what they do is they put a little 2 beside it to remind them what they've done. Whatever you do to the denominator must also be done to the numerator. So 2 times 2 is 4. So 4/6 is the same as 2/3. So if we take something like this, that's in thirds, okay, and we take 2/3 of that, and then we change it into something that is sixths. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sixths. So what we're making here, the 2/3 and the 4/6, they're called equivalent fractions. They have to be the same. If you start changing numbers, well, you're not going to get the right answer, okay? So make sure that you're making equivalent fractions once you've determined what that lowest common denominator has to be. Once you've got your lowest common denominator, you can kind of ignore the denominator because the math then happens in the numerator. So you just add the 1 and the 4 and you get 5. So again, what we're doing here is we're adding sixths together and we end up with 5 sixths. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sixths here, plus if we take this and divide that into 6 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and take one of them, that 1, 2, 3, 4 plus that 1/6 there, make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right? So for this one, what's the lowest common denominator? Well, it's not 24. You could use 24. A lot of students, they just automatically multiply these two. And it would work, but it's too big. Okay, so, and you just make more work for yourself if you use denominators that are too big. We can get away with 12 because 4 and 6 both go into 12. And it's the smallest number that they both go into, okay? So I multiplied 4 by 3 to get 12. So I have to multiply 3 by 3 as well to give me 9. I multiplied 6 by 2 to get 12, so I have to multiply the 1 by 2 also, which gives me 2. And so when I finish, I have 11/12, okay? Okay, now, what happens when we start getting into adding mixed fractions? So this one's pretty easy, but there's a little twist. So adding mixed fractions, when you are working with mixed fractions, which again in high school math we don't do a lot of, but when you're adding mixed fractions is the only process where you can always leave them as mixed fractions, always. There's absolutely no problem. When you're multiplying, dividing, you have to switch them. And when you're subtracting, it's often a good idea to switch them to improper fractions before doing the math. These already have a common denominator, so what we do is we just add the whole parts, which is 5, and add the fraction parts, which gives us 7/5. Now this is not a great answer, okay, because we've got a mixed fraction, and as a part of that mixed fraction, we've got an improper fraction. So it should be one or the other. It shouldn't be mixed up like this. So the 7/5, so when we have a mixed fraction, this is another way we could write it. Okay, we don't write it that way, but we could, it's not wrong. And this here could be written like this. Okay, because 7/5 is 1 2/5. That in turn could be written like this. And then that would be written like that. So that is the final answer to this. Now, if we turn these into improper fractions first, not a bad idea here. Because we have the same denominator, we don't have to do a lot of multiplying afterwards. So let's do that. So turning something from a mixed fraction into an improper fraction, 3 times 5 is 15, add the 3 is 18. Okay, so there are 3 whole 5s, which is why we multiply, and then we add what's left over. So 18/5 is the same as 3 3/5. And then 2 4/5 is 2 times 5 is 10, plus 4 is 14, 14/5. Now we add these two, 18 and 14. So when you're doing mental math, sometimes it helps to break the numbers up. So 18 plus 10 is 28. Then you add the 4, gives you 32. Now, if you want to turn 32/5 into a mixed fraction, 5 goes into 32 6 times, because 5 times 6 is 30, and you have 2 left over. Okay, and of course we're getting the same answer. So take your pick. This one was pretty easy to do with it in mixed fraction form, so no problem. All right, so after the last one, this one's a bit easier. The common denominator, the least common denominator or lowest common denominator is 24. Okay, and that does happen to be the multiple of these two, 8 times 3. So we're going to go 24 and 24. And then we'll figure out what the numerators have to be. So we multiplied this by 3 to get 24, so we have to multiply this by 3 as well, which is 9. We multiplied this by 8 to get 24, so we have to multiply this by 8, which is 16. 9 and 16, anytime you're adding 9, add 10, subtract 1. Makes it really easy, is 25. Okay? 25 over 24. And if you had to put that in mixed fraction form, 24 goes into 25 once with 1 left over. So that's that one. And now we'll do some subtraction. 5/8 minus 1/2. So subtraction is no different from addition. The only difference with subtracting fractions is when you have mixed fractions where the fraction portion of the one that's being subtracted is bigger than the fraction portion that the one you're subtracting from. And we're going to see one like that in a minute. We need a common denominator, just like with addition. Okay, that common denominator is 8. This is 5 because that hasn't changed. The 8 has not changed, so the 5 doesn't change. 1 over 2 is the same as 4 over 8. This is also equal to 1/2. Okay? 5 minus 4 is 1. So that's that one done. 1/2 minus 1/6. It doesn't get much easier than that. Common denominator is 6. 1/2 expressed as a number over 6 is 3/6. 3/6 is the same as 1/2. 1/6, that doesn't change. So 3 minus 1 is 2. Now, this is not a good final answer, okay? You want to reduce that because 2/6 is equal to 1/3. So always make sure you reduce your final answer. Almost every teacher will take marks off for not reducing a final fraction answer, okay? So learn to recognize when they can be reduced. Okay, common denominator, 12, right? So 12 minus 12. We multiplied this by 3 to get 12, so we multiply this by 3 to get 9. We multiplied this by 4 to get 12, so we multiply this by 4 to get 8. We're subtracting, and we get 1 over 12. Okay, running out of room, so I'm going to erase those. 5 over 6 minus 1 over 4. So let me show you what would happen if you used 24. You would get the right answer, but it's too big. Okay, you don't need to use 24, but let me just show you how it works. So we multiplied 6 by 4 to get 24. We multiplied 5 by 4 to get 20. We multiplied 4 by 6 to get 24, so we multiply 1 by 6 to get 6. And what we end up with is 14 over 24. Now that reduces, doesn't it? Okay, both of those numbers are divisible by 2, so we are going to end up with 7 over 12, and that's our final answer. So this isn't wrong, and as long as you remember to reduce when you're done, it's okay, but there is a smaller number that will work, and of course it's 12. Okay, so I multiplied this by this by 2 to get 12. I multiplied this by 2 to get 10. I multiply the 4 by 3 to get 12. I multiply the 1 by 3 to get 3. I do my math and I end up with the same answer. So it's better when you can find the lowest common denominator, but again, it's not absolutely critical, just as long as you remember to reduce when you're done, okay? Okay, so how about this one? 2.5 minus 1 1/4. Now, when you're subtracting mixed fractions, it's helpful to first notice whether this fraction here is bigger or smaller than this fraction here. And you know, if this whole number is bigger than this one, well then you really definitely have to go to mixed fraction or improper fractions. But it's more important to look at the fraction parts. This fraction is smaller than this one, so I can actually subtract the whole parts and subtract the fraction parts. So if I subtract the whole parts, I get 1. And subtracting the fraction parts, half minus a quarter, well, you can kind of think about it, right? If you come home from a hard day's work and your friends have ordered pizza and there's 1/2 of the pizza left and you eat 1/4 of it, well, you've taken 1/4 away from 1/2, which is going to leave a quarter, isn't it? So, but here's the math behind it. So common denominator is 4 because 4 is the smallest number that 2 and 4 both go into. 1/2 is the same as 2/4. 1/4, that doesn't change, and it leaves us with 1/4. And so then we just pop that in there, okay? So 2.5 minus 1.25 is 1.25. Now for this last one, the fraction part that we're subtracting is larger than what we're subtracting from. So 1/4 is larger than 1/6. Now, if you want to stick with mixed fractions, and I don't recommend it in this case, you have to borrow a whole number from this one and put it in the fraction part. That will make the fraction part that you're subtracting from bigger. But I think it's awkward to do that, okay? I think that if you recognize that this is bigger than this, and I'm not talking about the whole numbers, I'm only talking about the fraction parts. So this fraction, 1/4, is bigger than 1/6, right? What I would do is automatically change these into improper form, unless they're huge, in which case you could do the borrowing method, and I'll do that in a separate video. So what we're going to do is we're going to say 3 times 6 is 18, and adding the 1 gives us 19/6. And 1 times 4 is 4, add 1 is 5. Now the common denominator of 6 and 4 is 12. So we're going to put a 12 and a 12. We've multiplied 6 by 2 to get 12, so we have to multiply 19 by 2, which is 38. And we have to we multiplied the 4 times 3 to get 12, so we multiply the 5 times 3 to give us 15. 38 minus 15, okay, so if you want to do it in your head, so if you use your iPhone or your calculator all the time to do simple math, you'll never get good at doing it in your head, and it'll always be a struggle, it'll always be slow. So put the calculator away and do some of these simple things either on paper, calculate it out, or do them in your head. So 38 minus 15, how about we do 38 minus 10? That's easy, right? Gives us 28. Now subtract another 5, and it gives us 23. So we end up with 23/12. The other way you could do this is like this. So 38 minus 15. So this is how we're taught to do it in, I don't know, grade 4 or 5. 5 from 8 is 3. 1 from 3 is 2. And there's our 23. Okay, so that's an introduction to adding and subtracting fractions. That's all for this video. Thanks very much for watching. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share widely so that everybody can benefit from these instructions. All right, take care and see you next time. Thanks.